Poto Williams.
Oh, sorry.
Kia ora, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a little bit hard to follow my colleague after that very useful contribution. Very useful contribution to this debate. Firstly, some acknowledgements, Mr. Speaker. I want to acknowledge Dr. Paul Hutchison, who led the Select Committee when we first heard the submissions on this particular bill. I want to acknowledge Hone Harawira and Dame Tariana Turia for their pioneering work in getting us to the point where we are about to have the third reading of this particular bill. There are a couple of points I want to make, Mr. Speaker. The first one is the use of the vernacular quit in the legislation, and it's something that I was really happy to advance, because the vernacular of quit is something that we now associate with giving up smoking, with smoking cessation. We all know quit coaches, we all know quit line, we all know about quitting as in reference to smoking cessation. So I'm really pleased that this piece of legislation has responded to the use of quit, the vernacular, the common term of the day, so that we know what we're talking about in this legislation. The other thing I'm pleased about is the use of the term standardisation as opposed to plain, because the whole purpose of this bill was to reduce the impact of tobacco companies' influence on the kind of latent advertising that is the packaging of cigarettes. So standardising the packaging, it really neutralises the impact of the individual tobacco companies' influence on that packaging. And the standardisation also refers to the types of messaging, the types of graphics, the size of the font, the colour of the packaging as well. So all packaging will be very similar. The tobacco companies will still be able to put their name on it, but it will be in a format that's standardised across all of the products. Mr. Speaker, the importance of this piece of legislation is about prevention. It's not necessarily about getting people who are currently smokers to give up. That's not really the full intent of it. It's really about prevention. It's about ensuring that we prevent our young people from taking up smoking in the first place. And there's one thing I do want to say. I am the daughter of smokers, and both my parents smoked, and both my sister and myself were inevitably going to become smokers because we were in the environment where smoking occurred. But one of the biggest things that motivated me to change, and I think many of us who are parents in this house will know this, that our children are the greatest motivators for change in our lives. And the day that my daughter said to me, "Don't do that anymore, Mum, that's yucky," was the day I went, you know what, she's right. The other thing she said to me was, "I don't want you to die." And that was pretty compelling. The reason that standardised packaging is so important is that we want our children to get the message really early on that smoking is yucky, because they will motivate their parents to change and they will not take up smoking themselves. And that's really important when we look at Pacific rates of smoking, which have really gone through the roof. We want our children to be motivating us as parents to change, and also to be leading the charge of not taking up smoking themselves. So I really commend what is happening with the standardised packaging, with the graphics and with the messaging. Mr. Speaker, at the Select Committee we heard stories from previous smokers about the standardised packaging, you know, the old packaging that they used to see in their homes, the colour of the packaging, how compelling that was. So I'm really pleased that the prevention aspect of this legislation will go ahead. The one thing I do want to say in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, was that yes, I too was concerned when the Select Committee had done all this work and we were delayed in bringing the bill back to the House. Now, there were a couple of reasons that were promoted. The first one, of course, was the impact of the litigation that was going through WTO at the time. And the other one that my colleague has rightly pointed out was perhaps a significant influence of the tobacco lobby in delaying the passage of this bill. And I can only surmise that it may have something to do with two current members of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Shane.